draft of the new set of regulations is ready. Our consultant, Dr. Bitsnich, is expected in Mauritius in July 2022 for a series of consultations with all relevant stakeholders. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I will now go through some of the major setbacks we had with the 1988 Food Act and elaborate on how the Food Bill 2022 will address these issues. When it comes to the very interpretation section of the Act, there were some shortcomings regarding the whole chain of food processing and manufacturing. Currently, our legislation is not aligned with certain updated standards enumerated in the Codex Alimentarius. The Codex Alimentarius is a collection of internationally recognized standards, codes of practice, guidelines, and recommendations made by the Food and Agriculture Organization, that is the FAO. Among the various new proposals we are bringing forth, we are coming up with a new definition for article. The current law only allows for the control of foodstuff. Henceforth, the term article will encapsulate any food, any appliance, any package, any contact material, and any labeling or advertising material in connection with the sale or production of any food. This will allow us to widen the scope of the law so as to include all the components involved in the preparation of food. We are also introducing new notions, namely extraneous matter and filth, which are currently absent from the law. Extraneous matter will cover any objectionable foreign matter in any article, including filth. Filth will specifically refer to objectionable matters contributed by animal contamination or insanitary conditions. Such new legal provisions will henceforth allow to differentiate between what should be considered as forming part of a food and what should not. By doing so, we are doing away with any ambiguity which might crop up in court cases. The definition of food is also being updated to do away with any form of ambiguity. In fact, not all substances consumed by human beings can be considered as food according to law. The new bill will remove items like feed, plants prior to harvesting, drugs or medicine, which are clearly defined as non-food, from the purview of the food legislations. Such products are regulated by the Pharmacy Division of the Ministry and the Ministry of Agro-Industry. In our drafting process, we also realized that we had to widen the definition of food business, which currently only applies to food involved in commercial operation. Food distributed for charitable purpose could not be controlled. We are now proposing to include all entities, whether private or public, profit or non-profit, engaged in any stage of food manufacturing, process, packaging, storage, import, or distribution under the umbrella of food business. Likewise, we are also proposing the new notion of food business operators. It will englobe any person running a business related to food so as to know precisely who is responsible for a food business. The bill also stipulates that no person shall operate a food business unless he is registered as such under the Business Registration Act. Over the years, we have found that such details are crucial, particularly in cases of non-compliance and when legal actions are contemplated. The current food laws also do not cater for the element of food hazard. Hazard pertains to any biological, chemical, or physical agent, or even condition of food likely to cause an adverse effect on human health will be considered as a hazard. Henceforth, this will be clearly spelled out in our laws. We deemed it important to clearly define the types of contaminants associated with food and whose presence renders food unsafe for human consumption. In order to be able to do so, we have to conduct microbiological tests, which allows to detect the presence of harmful microorganisms in food. The bill will thus review the definition of food microbiologist so as to allow this professional to specifically look for pathogens in food products. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, eating habits are subject to constant change and innovation. Some years back, who would have thought that internationally humans would be consuming flowers and insects? Some food products are also artificially grown in laboratories. The bill will thus also cater for such novel food, which is being defined as food which do not have a history of being safe for human consumption, and which require an assessment to define its impact on human health. We have also proposed to clearly spell out conditions relating to the import of food in Mauritius. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, in addition to the controls carried out by our Public Health and Food Safety Inspectorate, it's essential that food business operators are aware of their legal responsibilities. We will only then be in a position to ensure that food on our market is compliant to laws and, above all, safe to consumers. Section 5 of the Food Bill sets out a clear list of responsibilities which shall be upheld by any food business operator. Among the new measures proposed, the bill will instruct food business operators to ensure that no person likely to be suffering from an infectious disease is involved in any stage of food production, processing, storage, or distribution. The food business operator will be required to inform competent authorities of any event constituting a threat to the integrity of his food product. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, we have seen over the past week the whole issue regarding the safety of a particular bottled water sold in our local market. While this bill ensures that the food business operator shall notify any matter liable to pose a threat to human health to our Public Health and Food Safety Inspectorate, we are of the view that the legal provisions should go further. In order to ensure such compliance at all times, we will propose to further strengthen our laws through amendments at committee stage. We will propose that henceforth both food business operators and laboratories, whether public or private, have to disclose matters of public health interest to the relevant authorities. The food bill will also broaden the powers of the authorized officer. The authorized officer shall be designated by the supervising officer, and he will have the duty to ascertain that all provisions of this bill, as well as regulations made under it, are fully complied with. The new powers of the authorized officer will allow him to enforce the law in a more efficient and effective manner. It's crucial to gather as much evidence as possible in order to strengthen court cases during trials. Henceforth, this officer will be allowed to secure photographic, visual, and audio elements for use in court cases. In the exercise of his duties, and whenever he has reasonable doubts to do so, he will be able to stop, detain, and search any vehicle likely to be involved in any given stage of the food business. In order to provide added security and protection to the authorized officer, this bill provides that he is accompanied by a police officer in the discharge of his duties. Our aim is to empower both enforcing officers as well as those involved in the food business so as to guarantee safe food for our consumers. This bill, at Section 12, rightly provides for the owner of any article seized to be treated fairly. Henceforth, the owner of a seized article will be able to apply for a court order directing the authorized officer to release the article seized should he feel that he has been unfairly treated. While this bill is providing extensive powers to the enforcing officers at Section 4, this provision ensures that there will be no abuse of procedures. The new food bill also clarifies the legal responsibility when it comes to the cost incurred in the destruction or disposal of seized article. The current legislation does not specify who shall bear the cost burden, and for some isolated operators, this was an open door to abuse whereby even the cost of logistics and transport were shifted to the ministry. Henceforth, the entire cost implication will be borne by the owner of article seized. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, Section 15 of this bill is also a new legal provision, and it provides for food recall triggered by a food business operator. The Public Health and Food Safety Inspectorate has two means to ensure compliance to the provisions of food legislations. It can either carry out routine regular checks with food business operators, and it can also act whenever there is a complaint suggesting non-compliance. Very often, the food business operators are themselves the best judges of the safety of their food. Henceforth, they will have the legal obligation to inform the Ministry of Health and Wellness of any such issue which puts public health at stake. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, several ambiguities have been noted in the current Act regarding the utilization of legal tools like prohibition orders and improvement notices. Section 17 of the bill clearly clears the uncertainty of the present legislation by explicitly detailing the line of action to be adopted in each case. This new section will also provide the food business operator with the possibility to make an application to a court of law in case his appeals to the ministry are not acceded to. The current Food Act is also silent on the corrective measures to be taken by the food business operator whenever the latter is in a situation of non-compliance. If such corrective measures are not taken in prescribed delays, henceforth, a food business operator, whenever might be asked to discontinue its activities up until it does not comply the legal dispositions in force. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, another salient point in the bill is the time limit for prosecution. Currently, the time limit is of 90 days, and with this bill, it has been extended to 12 months. This will provide adequate length of time to fully investigate into offences and gather evidence before prosecution. It should, however, be noted that in offences where samples have to be taken for chemical analysis, the time limit of 90 days is being maintained. This is to ensure that samples' integrity in case there is a challenge during court proceedings. Section 22 of the bill is a new provision aiming at protecting the authorized officer from any civil liability during the performance of his duty. This protection is applicable as long as the authorized officer has acted in good faith. Finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, the proposed bill is increasing the fine for a convicted food business operator from 2,000 in the current Food Act to a fine not exceeding 100,000 and imposing a term of imprisonment not exceeding 2 years. In the case of corporate bodies, the fine imposed should not be less than 100,000 rupees. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, this bill will also pave the way for the introduction of innovative and forthcoming measures regarding food safety and nutritive value. Budget 2022-2023 has rightly proposed the setting up of the Mauritius Food Standard Agency. The Mauritius Food Standard Agency will, among others, act as a body assessing and proposing food standards for adoption. It will also coordinate and review our whole food control system. My ministry is also finalizing its new food fortification program, which will ensure prescribed levels of folic acid, iron, and vitamin B12 in flour consumed in Mauritius. We should therefore have the required framework to ensure that these measures are strictly adhered to and that consumer rights are upheld at all times. The legal framework we are setting up will largely contribute in allowing us to achieve our objectives. Our success will also depend and rest upon the shoulders of our enforcing bodies. The Public Health and Food Safety Inspectorate will have to operate with renewed urgency and commitment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I am confident that this bill will further protect our population when it comes to the safety of the food our citizens consume. With this bill, we will be at par with the highest standards like those in force in countries like Australia and New Zealand. These countries have proven track records in this domain, and the positive impact such measures have had on their population is tangible. If we are able to come up with such innovative measures and principles for our food safety, we have to be grateful to the support and trust of our Honorable Prime Minister Pravin Kumar Jagnnath. I will end by thanking my officers of my ministry as well as all the stakeholders of the food industry who have worked together to come up with this bill. I also wish to commend the precious support unconditionally forwarded to our country by the World Health Organization. Finally, I'm grateful to the contribution of my colleague, the Attorney General, Honorable Manish Gobin, as well as his officers for their valuable assistance in the preparation of this bill. With these words, I commend the bill to the House. Honorable Goulet, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Let me say right from the outset that this is a non-controversial legislation, and I'm sure there'll be wide consensus in relation to the provisions of the bill. Now, the Minister has stated, and I like the way he has delivered his speech, nice tone, non-controversial, and he has stated very clearly that the piece of legislation, that this new legislation on food safety, was prepared with technical assistance from the World Health Organization, and the services of an expert from Australia was enlisted. And now the bill has been moved, and as we say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Now, but I must draw the attention of the Minister to some shortcomings. Though the Minister mentioned that there will be provision for the setting up of a food safety agency. Am I right? This is what you say. A standard agency, sorry. Now, I would have expected the Minister to go the full hog and set up a food authority. There is provision for the setting up of a food authority in the Indian legislation, and it works very well. You know, I'm not going to go through the provisions of this food authority, but let me say that, be it in New Zealand or New South Wales, it's an authority that delivers, and it's almost like a one-stop shop. Now, Minister stated in no uncertain terms that there was wide discussion at the bar of public opinion with all relevant stakeholders. We would like to know when and who were those stakeholders, whether food hawkers were open, whether there was wide discussion, and whether the views were taken on board. There are also, and I've noted in the legislation, there are also dispersal of responsibilities and effective powers. One of the shortcomings of similar legislation is the lack of inter- and intra-institutional coordination. And the way forward to address this issue is to set up a one-stop shop oversight operator committee. Mr. Speaker, let us look at the legislation per se in respect of deterrence and enforcement of the provision. Doubt lingers as to the effective application of the provisions of the legislation, how to strike the balance between deterrence and enforcement. But the Minister knows very well that if the law is applied in all its rigors, media operators will have to cease their activities. The Minister of Health may argue, in respect of provision of the legislation, that there is a transition period of 6 months for ongoing business. But as for newly registered business which come into operation after the new act is proclaimed, it certainly may be an uphill battle to be in full compliance with all the relevant regulations. Because, as we say, the angels or the devils are always in the regulations. And there is a clear object, that is to level up. And the leveling up should be done in stages. Of course, nothing should be at the expense of our health status. And I recall when we were in government, the Minister of Health and Quality of Life acted without fear and prejudice to warn fast food operators like KFC and many other reputed restaurants to take corrective sanitary measures to be responsive to the provisions of the Food Act. It's one thing reading the Riot Act without fear or prejudice, but I appeal to Minister, his object should be putting deterrence first, and this should be the best endeavor. However, there should be no selective or arbitrary target and action. Mr. Deputy Speaker, from farm to fork, sanitary and phytosanitary measures have to provide safety, and there cannot be security without safety. As a net food and feed and fertilizer importing country, we have the moral and legal obligation to protect consumers and widen the circle of opportunities for food vendors to operate in a healthy, secluded, or open premises. Food courts make it easy for services to be delivered in compliance to sanitary norms, and there should be no approval of application unless initial criteria are met. These are followed within a reasonable time by a set of conditions. And this is not spelled out, it's not clear in the legislation. Maybe these will be spelled out in the regulation. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the law cannot be an end to itself, and the culture of impunity is due to the inability of the regime to empower the small food victualers and street vendors. There are lessons to be learned and drawn from operators and authorities of East Asian countries or United Arab Emirates on norms, standards of food consumption. United Arab Emirates is a free port, and raw bulk commodities like seafood from India or Oman are rinsed, washed, chilled, irradiated, and then vacuum packed for consumption. The test of fitness for consumption is rigorously applied. I know of a Mauritian entrepreneur operating in Dubai who's investing in a warehouse to produce vacuum-packed food for export. I'm sure it can be done and it should be done in our great little republic. There was a time when exporters were encouraged. The Minister of Civil Service, I'm sure, would recall that there was a time when exporters were encouraged to export vacuum-packed pineapples, but it was not to the taste of buyers and consumers. Mr. Speaker, as I've stated earlier, be it the little angels or the devils, they are always in the details, and the law is flawed if the regulations are not constantly updated. But these regulations are not never an ending process. But let me appeal to the Minister. These regulations should not be a passport for harassment or persecution. I'm sure the Ministry will adopt a carrot and stick approach. Non-compliance, of course, and loopholes are largely due to the absence of what I stated earlier, of a one-stop shop operator oversight committee. There is a clarion call for professionalism to level up. Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, as stated earlier, were the provisions for the setting up of the Food Authority. In India, as I've stated, it operates under the Food Safety and Standards Act of 2006. Inquiries on registered complaints are conducted in all discretion, and I hope this will be taken on board when complaints are when registered complaints are conducted. Now, the New South Wales Food Authority, which is a government agency that works to ensure food sold in the state is safe and correctly labeled, and that consumers are able to make informed choices about the food they eat. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Minister, I'm sure, is aware of the story of Mary the cook, who was barred from working because of orophycal transmissible viral hepatitis A. And the Minister of Health highlighted earlier the number of cases referred to hospital in relation to food-borne diseases. And those who handle the food should not be carriers of infected diseases, and provisions in the legislation make it quite clear that the onus of compliance is on the operator. Why? Because those who handle food should not be carriers of those infected diseases I've stated can easily be transmitted. And hygienic compliance is the rule and the norm. If not, if there is no compliance, closure becomes inevitable. But again, I appeal to the Minister, there should be no violent disruption of the business. The application should not be abrupt. Enforcement is undertaken on the basis of surveillance, monitoring, and inspection. And there should be random sampling of food products carried out diligently by the officers of the Food Safety Department. This is the case in respected jurisdiction, and this is what makes the difference. Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, I don't know when you've been to an open market, if you walk into the meat and fish sections of the central market in Port Louis, something which I enjoy and do regularly, irrespective of the hygienic status. But it is not the sellers or victuallers who are the guilty parties, but the authorities. Where are the facilities that should be provided by local authorities? When you walk in there, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there will always be a green fly humming, and you may be lucky if it lands on your nose, or if the Speaker was here, I would have said in his mouth, if he dropped his jaw open. But you know, when you walk in there, you should never be loudmouth, because you're in for a big surprise. Now, Minister mentioned extraneous material. Now,
no, you withdraw your comment.
Sorry?
You withdraw your comment about.
All right, I will.
Please. Thank you.
You're so nice that I will withdraw. Now,
Avoid it.
yeah. Now, Minister mentioned of extraneous material. And you know, there's always dropping from rats or birds, and these have to be addressed. Because if we are talking of extraneous material, let us start where these things happen. So, when we come to the applicability of the law, the Minister will have to be explicit on applicability of measures taken to address the sensitive issue I've stated of food security from farm to fork. Mr. Speaker, of course, we all enjoy, call it a cheese, chicken burger, or fried chicken, but we have to be mindful of saturated cooking oil. And I don't know how often samples are taken, you know, in these fast food restaurants, and one of the biggest problems that consumers face is the use of saturated cooking oil. And the cooking oil, as we say, is being used over and over again. It's saturated fat, and we don't need the American Heart Foundation to tell us of the high incidence of cardiovascular disease on our island. We will even have to be mindful of over-grilled food. If not, you may grill your health with carbon produce, which is carcinogenic. One thing which I expect the Minister to do, I'm sure he will do it, is to wage an aggressive campaign on food safety, as prevention is better than cure. A culture of food hygiene has to be inculcated. You know, the craze today, as you've said, is organic and healthy food for the sophisticated, health conscious, but these choices have to be extended at an affordable price to all. Otherwise, it can be garbage in, garbage out. A healthy nation eats well and exercises well. Mr. Deputy Speaker, agriculture and agribusiness have to be smart. And in my intervention on the budget, I appeal to government to create the enabling environment to attract venture capital in smart agro-industry, what we call controlled water and fertilizers, to produce quality produce of what we eat and eat what we produce. Smart agriculture is open field and under shade houses on a large scale, intensive but healthy. Intensive farming or breeding is not always healthy if the optimum conditions are not established. There is, of course, an endless debate as to the origin of COVID, which is still prevalent. Is it why open market? Time will tell. But herding of live animals is an obvious source of infection. Live crabs, lobsters stuck in aquarium or basket is not as fresh as customers think. A fishmonger knows that you should not sell thawed produce as fresh. Before I come to the specific provisions of the bill, the minister will have to be clear on implementation and enforcement. Will all the provisions be proclaimed and the bundles of regulations applied with immediate effect? When will the updated regulations come into force? And before these regulations come to force, I know he has stated it in his, at the beginning of his speech, that he had a meeting with the stakeholders. They have been properly sensitized, but it's relevant that they are apprised fully in relation to regulations. Otherwise, if those regulations are applied, it may mean the demise of those enterprises, small enterprises. So that's why I say these have to be discussed and the consequences have to be weighed. You know, if the sellers of biryani, halim or dim sum or ice cream who park the vans or tricycles in the main or inside streets or back streets will indeed have to cease the activities if wrong signals are conveyed. And it's easy to catch them on and off guard. Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, let me come now to another craze, the craze for organic food and meatless produce, which the Minister mentioned, and it's big business. It's the wave of the mushroom mania, and the global market for plant-based products could exceed $160 billion by the end of the decade, making up 7.7% of the world protein market. Plant-based meat alternatives are predicted to exceed 74 billion rupees by 2030, up from 4.2 billion US dollars. Sorry, I'm talking of dollars, 74 US dollars, up from around 4.2 billion dollars currently, with industry giants like Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods, Eat Just, and Oatly helping drive the market momentum. It's an opportunity and Mauritius has to attract potential investors and encourage the emergence of incubators. EDB cannot sit on its laurels and expect manna to fall from heaven. It has to go where the investment is, grow soya, and eat chicken drumstick prepared from soya or steak from mushrooms. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we're exposed also to fake produce, and the Minister will have to err on the principle of caution. Consumers have to be protected from artificial produce like crab sticks or meatballs, novel food on sale, and it's detrimental to health. Most of these produce are imported from China and Malaysia. And the importance of concluding free trade agreement is to prevent dumping and to ensure, Mr. Deputy Speaker, compliance to sanitary and phytosanitary norms established by World Trade Organization and by most favored nation. This is relevant to compliance. Section 3 establishes conditions for import of food, but there is oversight when times are hard. They advertise for import of low-quality produce which have high coloring contents and chemicals like sodium monoglutamate to make them look appetizing. Mr. Deputy Speaker, these and many other produce are advertised and there's no scrutiny. When was the last chemical analysis carried out in respect of these produce, which are sold in our hypermarkets or supermarkets, and which is not even subject to proper scrutiny and therefore no chemical analysis is carried out. Besides, there's a clarion call to ensure interinstitutional cooperation and collaboration of accredited labs to avoid duplication and overlapping of resources. The food microbiology lab of the agro-industry is doing a professional job, but needs to be strengthened. Let me now come to the temporary ban on the sale of flat bottled water manufactured by QBL. And according to QBL, all the internal tests are negative, but external tests have to confirm the findings. The minister mentioned it, but he has to apply to the House that nothing is confirmed or agreed until final tests are carried out by Central Health Authority laboratories. The principle of nothing is agreed until everything is agreed by central labs is the thumb rule. But the private labs are accredited by relevant organizations, and we have to do, the minister has to clearly spell it out, whether results from private labs are full and final, or whether it is the final test carried out by the Central Health Authority laboratories, which are full and final. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there should be a coordinated thrust, and under Section 11, subsection 5AB, there is a need for clarity about the definition of as soon as reasonably practical for analysis of sample and the issuance of certificate to certify the result of the analysis or examination. There is provisions under Section 16 for an improvement notice, and the operator has 14 days to remedy. The public have to be fully apprised. Mr. Deputy Speaker, a lot of other tests and protocols related to the standards, and I'm sure are being followed and have shown no issues. So, the issue identified by the MSB, I would say, hit the vital flat water only, but random tests have to be carried out, and we should not only be selective. You know, if it's QBL today, and I'm sure all water which are sold in the shops, we take it for granted that they are fit for consumption, and I'm sure that procedures are followed, and the protocol established certainly are there to be adhered to. Now, the issue of collaboration and good working relationship. And we have to make sure that there is a good working relationship with MSB to evaluate the robust system and to see how they can be adapted and improved to meet their standards. And this is not always there. There is room for to narrow this deficit, and I hope the minister will look into it. And I expect him to tell us, you know, whether the private labs also, when the tests are carried out, it's important to know whether the tests carried out are full and final, I stated earlier, or whether we have to wait and rely for the result of tests delivered by the Central Health Authority. Mr. Speaker, it's very important that we take corrective measures and we address issues up front, and we make sure that we are not subject to undue penalty. I recall one exporter of samosa to EU lost its market because water was dripping from the ceiling, allegedly on the produce. And the inspectorate team from EU regularly assesses for export of tuna or any food export meet norms and standards of the EU. The flaw is fatal. Under the Labour-led government, there were experts posted at the Ministry of Agro-Industry to ensure compliance, full compliance with the hazard analysis control critical point norms to meet EU standards on sanitary and phytosanitary measures. It's a question of export or die, and therefore the 7th step of hazard analysis control critical point are relevant to mitigate the impact of food hazards and high food risk. I will come back to my good friend, the Honourable Minister of Civil Service, and he can vouchsafe that there should be no compromise, no retreat, no surrender on quality, norms, and standards. I have seen too many casualties because of greed and vain attempts to cut corners. We should say no to dumping. We introduced the Trade Act, that is the anti-dumping and countervailing measures in 2010 to prevent domestic injury. Buyers and other sellers are always looking at us, and as I say, Mauritius is not the most sought-after destination by tourists, and the health of a nation is wealth. Whether we buy Mauritians, of course, buy Rodrigans, and save jobs, rests on quality or exotic produce. We cannot sweeten the honey of Rodrigue with sugar. The honey of Rodrigue used to be the world's best, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Let me come on the unfettered powers. The unfettered powers, the authorized officers have almost unfettered powers as confirmed under Section 8 to 11. And they have to act diligently and not use the prerogatives to have the palms greased and their pockets swollen. We place our confidence in them, and they're expected to be fiercely independent. Our determination of compliance, of an article, the withdrawal notice in the form set out in the 5th schedule provides the comfort to the aggrieved person. If it has to be disposed of, the magistrate has to give consent. The authorized officer cannot act arbitrarily, and his fulfillment rests upon a certificate issued by the scientific officer, that is the microbiologist or the government analyst. Mr. Speaker, unless an operator has acted in good faith, which is subjective, the person is subject to strict liabilities, and over and above a substantial fine, he or she may spend 2 years in jail. Besides, the minister can prepare a battalion of regulations to make life harder or hell to operators. And since charity begins at home, I would advise the Minister of Health to impress upon Agricultural Marketing Board to modernize its cold storage room where semi-perishable goods like potatoes, onions, and garlic are stored. As to the Mauritius Meat Authority, there is room for sanitary improvement. Kitchen hospitals need good hygienic uplift. So the minister certainly has not an arduous task, but it's important that there is a wide campaign to sensitize stakeholders on the merit of this legislation. At the end of the day, a host of accompanying measures should be extended to operators to comply with the provisions of the major legislation. It's a question of life and livelihood, Mr. Deputy Speaker, an era of costs, of crisis of living. So I hope that the minister will not act abruptly. There will be constructive dialogue with all the stakeholders. They will be impressed as to the merits of this legislation, but I expect the minister not to disrupt their business, because as matters stand, the regulations are such that it may bring the business of people and those who are earning a livelihood as small entrepreneurs, those who are working as food hawkers, their businesses can come to a standstill. I'm sure the minister will live up to the expectation of one and all, and this bill has its merits. Its merits far, far outweigh some of its demerits, but at the end of the day, we have to respond to the needs of those who are weak, vulnerable, but desperately trying to earn a decent living. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Minister, you ready now? Honorable Kunjusha.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, thank you for allowing me to contribute to this important piece of legislation, and I will begin by congratulating my colleague, the Honourable Dr. Jagatpal, for presenting this bill today before the House, the food bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, allow me very politely to take up a couple of reservations, address these reservations, the one that were raised by Honorable Dr. Boulel during his intervention, he mentioned something about persecution of, or probable persecution of street food vendors and hawkers. Allow me to reassure him and the House, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, that this bill is not a way for harassing these street vendors. It will be in the interest of everybody when our food processing, our food standards are raised. And this is what consumers look for generally. So there is not going to be any persecution. The regulations are not meant to persecute people, but rather to ensure that our population benefits from an appropriate set of standards and appropriate quality, and obviously benefit from healthy and safe food. Very interesting couple of words being used by the honourable member who spoke before me, and he began by saying this is a non-controversial piece of legislation. I'm very happy to note that. In fact, I'll go a step further by saying that it's a very commendable piece of legislation which is coming after 24 years and repealing the Food Act of 1998. Again, it is possibly not a perfect bill, I would agree, but every bill is perfectible. So when we talk about the reservations that the Honourable Boulel voiced out earlier on, sometimes about sampling size and frequency of testing and dedicated resources to carry out such inspections, allow me again to reassure the honourable member and the House that I am certain that the team at the level of the Ministry of Health and the mover of the bill, the Honourable Minister, will consider all these details in due course during the implementation of this Act. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, as said by the mover of the bill earlier on, the overall object of this bill is to repeal the Food Act of 1998, replacing it with a more modern, a consolidated legislation, which relates to the safety and the nutritional quality of our food. Mr. Speaker, sir, much has changed after 24 years, food being manufactured, handled, delivered, consumed in different ways, and all this coupled with the increasing global trade, which obviously calls for the update in this existing legislation. Moreover, with the changing food habits of our citizens, we have to ensure that food safety becomes an integral part of our concern for the health of our population. And I say this in the most amicable manner. When I was listening to the honourable member earlier, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, it crossed my mind that this is the bill that is going to prevent distribution of macaroni périmé. I say it in the nicest way possible. So it comes at the right time. It will prevent you from those kind of distribution in future. I said it as in jest, in good jest. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, the food bill comes at the right moment, not because of macaroni. And the proof lies in the tasting. Yeah, the proof of the pudding lies in the tasting of the whichever. We love that. We absolutely love that. The food bill, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, comes at the right moment as we are called upon to cope with all these emerging challenges related to the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously with the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia. We have said it, we have accepted. It has worsened the global economy. Commodity prices have been rising. There have been massive disruptions in our supply chains. And another challenge relates to the potential disruption in the food supply itself due to the climate change and natural resource risks that we face. And unfortunately, the most badly hit are vulnerable households, including our women, in particular, single mothers or female-headed households and our elderly people. The food bill at this juncture, therefore, is a timely move to mitigate these risks, one of which is addressing rising food prices that obviously has been brought about with increase in fuel, cost of living, and addressing household food insecurity within our country. This bill looks at food safety in a very holistic manner and applies a better understanding of food regulation laws and defines harsher penalties for those who go against the law, enforcement and deterrence, not persecution at no level, and this will in turn ensure the safety of the food that we bring to our table. It is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, a fact that as our country goes on an upward development trend, our population will place more and more emphasis on quality and food safety. Mauritius, as we all know, has a unique blend of so many different cuisine, Indian, Chinese, African, European, our own quintessential Mauritian one. And in our supermarkets, the range of products and foodstuff keeps on expanding. With the introduction of this bill, this government, under the leadership of our Prime Minister, Honorable Pravin Jagannath, this government is ensuring that our population have access to healthy, safe and nutritious food which meets hygiene and safety standards. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, food safety, including sufficient quantity, safe and nutritious food, is an integral part of the Sustainable Development Goals for achieving a better and a sustainable future for all. The aim is to ensure that everybody has good quality food to lead a healthy life. And in the same vein, this government, with the recent budgetary measures, is focused on boosting an all-encompassing agricultural sector, including plants, animals, and fish production, as well as their transformation. And by doing so, the policy decisions, coupled with incentives to support our entrepreneurs, our local planters, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, these policies will reduce our dependency on imported food by promoting local crops, by promoting agro-processing and smart agriculture. In the budget 2022-2023, the government has already earmarked funds for the implementation of this law, and the agro-industry, considered to be a pillar of our economy, with the government aiming at higher levels of self-sufficiency to enable greater food security, but also to enable more investment, create more jobs, and therefore higher growth as well. As already captured in the budget, again, grants will be allocated to planters to boost up their production of fruits and vegetables. There'll be new methods of cultivation to planters where they will benefit from various grants. It is timely, Mr. Speaker, sir, that our standards for food quality be raised to meet not only the expectation of the population, but to bring us to international standards. And we have an increasingly diverse and growing number of tourists as well who will be visiting, who are already visiting our country. So upping our standard, our food standard, quality standard, is of prime importance. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, this bill also introduces substantial reforms to the regulatory regime for the safety and the suitability of food. The standards that are set out in the food bill relate to advertisement and pricing. Shortcomings to those will be closely monitored, and with a view to ensure quality food assurance, a healthy food safety ecosystem, and efficient food consumption patterns. The food bill at clause 3 lays the conditions relating to import of food, and at subclause 3A clearly stipulates that no person shall import into Mauritius any unsafe, misbranded or substandard food or food containing any extraneous matter. The safety mechanism provided by the food bill, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, will keep off food of inferior quality, misbranded food, for example, packages, advertisement displaying false or deceptive claims, or food containing non-permitted ingredients or additives, and unhygienically processed food, or food that is simply infected with bacteria, virus, fungus, you name it. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, the food business operators play a very big role in maintaining food safety in Mauritius. They have a multitude of responsibilities towards achieving food safety in their business, and therefore should apply a proactive approach and not fear prosecution if they have this proactive approach. An approach in identifying the food safety hazards and establishing the adequate control measures. It is good to note that the bill puts greater responsibilities on the food business operators. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, this bill will ensure that food products that are unsafe for human consumption do not reach the Mauritian market shelves. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, the health and the nutritional status of women and children are very much intimately linked. Nutrition plays a crucial role in the health and development of women and their children. It impacts on the cognitive development, on school performance, on productivity as a whole of our children. According to the World Health Organization, better nutrition is related to improved infant, improved child and maternal health, related to stronger immune systems, safer pregnancy and childbirth, lower risk of non-communicable diseases like diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, the implementation of the provisions of this bill will guarantee that our women and our children's health and development are very well taken care of, and this is a priority that has been consistently upheld by this caring government led by our Prime Minister. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, understanding the influence of gender on risk exposure and management is very, very essential for improving food safety. Both women and men have significant but different varying roles in food supply chains and in securing nutritional well-being of their family. Women, we acknowledge, are more responsible for food supply in households. Women, as it is most often the case, take more time when shopping than men, food shopping, simply because they are more concerned when it comes to the quality of the food. And as consumers, women are pivotal to making key decisions for households because they generally display higher standard of hygiene practices and are more receptive to receiving new information on health and food safety. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, consequently, women's empowerment and gender equity therefore become central to reducing the burden of foodborne illnesses. With the evolution of the concept of food safety, Mauritius is now facing new challenges. We have moved away from a low-income economy to an upper-middle and high-income diversified economy with growing industrial, financial, and tourist sectors. Basically, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, we have changes in gender dynamics. Therefore, on the consumption side, we take note that even our consumption patterns are changing, and in parallel, our demand for food create new exigencies for import, storage, processing, distribution. However, one should also note that we have changes in the environment leading to food contamination. We have, unfortunately, new and emerging bacteria and toxins. We have changes in the tests that diagnose foodborne illnesses. Thus, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, the modernization and the consolidation of the existing legislation has not only become a priority, it has actually become a necessity. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, the population will recall that in 2013, the then government had to stop the distribution of repas chauds after the food poisoning episode of some 90 primary students. The country has in the past, unfortunately, also witnessed the outbreak of salmonella and foot and mouth disease, which affected cattle, goats, pigs, sheep, chicken. That outbreak, the salmonella outbreak, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, affected nearly 10% of the country's poultry farms in 2016. Hundreds of sheep and pigs had to be slaughtered. Not too far back, this year itself, the company Ferrero voluntarily had to recall certain batches of their Kinder chocolate products in Mauritius and across the world as a precautionary measure after several cases of salmonellosis were detected in Europe. What I'm trying to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, is that the WHO, the World Health Organization, has estimated that almost 1 in 10 people in the world fall ill after eating contaminated food each year. Children under 5 years of age carry 40% of the foodborne disease burden, with 125,000 deaths every year, and at least 600 million people all over the world become inflicted with foodborne illnesses after consuming unsanitary food. And of all these 600 million people, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, at least 500,000 of those die every year. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, the food bill will ensure that we benefit from safe and nutritious food. This is key to sustaining life and promoting good health. Adulterated or unsafe food not only have adverse health consequences, but they have negative effects on our economy because this increases the medical costs incurred by the government and can have adverse effects on the tourism sector as well. Clause 11 of the bill, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, provide for the analysis and examination of samples which will assist in detecting food safety concerns such as microbial contamination, heavy metals, improper use of additives, and the bill also makes provision for food recalls to ensure the food safety and avoid any form of contamination. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, consumers also have a great role to play to maintain food safety. Consumers have the responsibility to purchase and check safe foods. This will compel food business operators and all businesses to uphold very high food safety standards. Even at home, in our household, the responsibility to keep the product safe rests on the consumer. Simple measures like proper hand washing, sanitizing the working area, segregation of fresh produce and cooked food. In fact, food safety is the shared responsibility of everybody involved with food, from government, the food industry, and us as consumers. To conclude, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, we are learning to live with all the changes that COVID-19 has brought, and at the same time, we have learned to take more precautions to protect ourselves. Food safety has become a worldwide concern, and achieving food safety has become more complex in the recent years. With more women at work, increase in income, change in food habits and lifestyle, there have been new challenges in the food industry with a wider variety of foods on the market and an increase in the number of fast food outlets. As a duty-bound government, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, we are confident that this piece of legislation will ensure better nutrition, which we all know is fundamental to better health. This bill demonstrates the commitment of the government to always prioritize healthy lifestyle. I once again extend my sincere appreciation to my colleague, the Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness, Dr. Jagatpal, and his entire team for their unshakable commitment to safeguard our health, that of our children, and of our, bless you, our citizens. Long live the Republic of Mauritius. I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much. I'll suspend for 30 minutes.